Hi, and welcome back to the ARTtech seminar. The next presentation is a story of one game company. They've already released successfully 15 games for different platforms. Please welcome Lasse Liljedahl.
Thank you. So hello everyone. My name is Lasse Liljedahl, and I am here today to tell you about a story of a game company, mainly based on our own events, but I hope that this will give some helpful advice for anyone who is willing to establish their own game company or just do their own game projects. But first, a few words about myself. I am the CEO of our company, but I'm also doing this game design, marketing, and lots of other stuff. And I played games since the late 80s, and well, nowadays I'm also a pretty passionate game collector. And into developing and modding, I entered in the late 90s, and has been doing that ever since. My education is a couple of years education in game design, but also I am a Master of Science in Astronomy. So my academic background is a little bit far away from my current profession. But to mention a few of my favorite games, I have a pretty wide taste regard to them. So as you can see, there are quite a lot of different games there. But what is Iceflake Studios, and why I am here today? Today, we are a Tampere-based company in Finland, and we are a 7-developer team. And we have made 15 games in total, and we have made games for all possible platforms, including mobile, PC, consoles, and also VR. And our games have well over 20 million players, and maybe even 25 million nowadays. And here are a few of the most notable games we have made. And in total, as I said, there are over 15 titles at the moment, but there are even more than 15 titles that we never released. So there are also those that I will show you today that I have never talked about before. But I want to emphasize 3 key points of game development in this presentation. And I hope that these would be helpful for anyone who would be willing to do their own games. So these would apply for any situation, for any developer. And those are basically that you need to be persistent in what you are doing. And you need to iterate between those projects that you are doing. And you need to keep your focus. And I will go back to these points later in the presentation, but I hope that you keep these in mind and try to remember while I tell about our experiences, about our trials and errors, what we have done. But first, let's start from the beginning. So our core team started making games in the late 90s. We had a small team with 2 graphic artists and 2 programmers. And we did our own projects with our own engine. And the first game we did was a role-playing game, which was quite a serious role-playing game called Tribes of Kantara 2. And why number 2? Because some of the developers in our team had made already Tribes of Kantara 1, which was never released, but why not go straight into 2? And after that never came out, so we started our new project called History Rally, which was a sci-fi themed racing game in historical environments, a very arcade-style racing game with guns. And those were projects that we made via internet at that time, and that's something that is quite different from today, because there were no broadband connections or nothing that sort, so we made it with modems and mostly ISDN. So that was quite advanced back then. And here are a few pictures of those old games we already had those days. But after a few years, the team disassembled and everyone went to their own ways, do their own things. I went to do my mandatory military service, and others went to other game companies like Bugbear and so on to do other games or software or just other things. But it didn't last long before we wanted to do more games in some form or the other. And because making own games was pretty hard, we decided that modifications would be quite a little easier to do. And we tried to find a good game where we would like to make our own modification. And you have to understand, because at that time there were no modern game engines like Unity or modern Unreal Engine, so we had to kind of figure our own way. And game modding was much more common back then. Almost every game could be modded, but the modding was quite hard because the tools were not very accessible, and it was pretty difficult and required programming skills to do any sort of other kind of modifications than reskins. So it was just learning by making, and slowly we became better at that. And one difference that I want to mention is that modding is a lot more official nowadays, because nowadays games have official mod supports and like straight support from Steam via Workshop and so on. Back then there were no official mod supports and that kind of stuff that you can have today. But one game had pretty good modding tools, and that was Battlefield 1942. There were its own editor that you can use to do your own stuff, and it was something that we really liked as a game. And Tapani Valkonen, who is my business partner and co-founder of Iceflake Studios, he started making a translation modification, translated the game into Finnish, and then started making some kind of advanced snow effects to the game. And that started our own modification that we continued, and with a goal to make Finnish wars in World War II as a complete modification or total conversion modification. And that ended up being Fin Wars, or called Fin Wars, which eventually expanded into one of the biggest and most popular modifications of Battlefield 1942. There were like all 3 Finnish wars from World War II. There were 3 playable sides, over 50 maps, lots of different weapons, vehicles, and so on that you could drive. And it's even today it is played around Finnish Independence Day when hundreds of players are still playing the game. And here are a few pictures of the game. We started making that game or modification early 2003. And after 1 year of development, we released our first public alpha and in February 2004. But the reviews were pretty crushing. And as you can see from those screenshots, the game was pretty buggy and there were lots of issues. But that didn't put us down because we just wanted to make a fun game and we loved making games. So we really didn't notice those negative reviews, and we kept improving and extending the game. But eventually, when years went on and we improved that game, also the reviews turned better and we got more attention. For example, the modification was put into one of cover CDs of one big German magazine, gaming magazine, and it was played even in Japan. So that attention from all kind of medias all around the world made us basically encouraged us to go on with the development. And one of the most important things about Fin Wars is that it's legacy, because many of the people who were involved in that project, there were like 10 to 15, depending on the time, of us who made that game. And many of those people are still working in game industry today and have been working with various titles. Here are just a couple of examples I put here to show what kind of games have been made by those people who was working also with Fin Wars. But also, a few of us decided that we have enough knowledge to start our own company and make our own games. So we decided that we would make Snowflake Studios a game company. our name was back then Snowflake Studios, which was changed later to Iceflake Studios. And of course, our goal was to make the most epic, massive multiplayer game ever, to include entire Eastern Front in World War II, and include all playable, all nations that you can play in it. So basically make a World War II online to Eastern Front. But the reality struck us down very quickly, and we had to change to smaller projects and make something new. Because frankly speaking, we were a little bit tired of making World War II games like 6 years in a row, so we wanted to make something else. And that something else was kind of a Battlefield-like game based in a Wild West environment. And that game was called Battlegrounds of the West. So for that game, we made our own engine, which was called Mammoth. We made our own tools and editors we could use. But of course, we would need our own platform to distribute the game. It was supposed to be like Steam, but for our own games, because this was only meant to be our first game that we would distribute later. And we had pretty big ambitions back then. And the game was also released, or revealed back in Assembly 2006, right here, or in Hartwall Arena back there, that it would come out in 2007. Well, of course, it didn't come out. And it was cancelled after a couple of years of development. But we made pretty far with that game, because we had our own engine, some of our own tools, and we got the game running with our own engine, and the game was playable. We could play multiplayer matches and shoot other players in our own environments. But for some reason, we still gave up with that game. During that time, the development tools for small developers like us had developed quite a lot. There were new tools like, for example, Unreal Developer Kit, which was based on Unreal Engine 3. And those were free and accessible for any developers. So we were thinking that maybe it could be Finwars 2 after all, because we had an itch to make a sequel, or standalone sequel for the modification. So we again decided to scale down a little bit and make kind of a standalone version of our old modification. But there were other problems, because now we were a company. And back then, during like 2007, 2008, the gaming industry in Finland was not as it is today. No one took you seriously. We went to multiple business parks and other places to introduce ourselves, that we could get help running business and get funding and that sort of stuff. But we were basically laughed out of those places, because no one really thought that you could make any kind of money or with game company, or no one could take you seriously. So having your own company, running your own business at the same time while you were trying to do your own game was very hard. And that was eventually one of the biggest reasons why we had to kind of put the project on the shelf after a couple of years of development. And we had to find alternatives for the game. And there was a big reality check in front of us, because we had released nothing new or original in 5 years. And the frustration level with us was pretty high, because if you do 5 years in a row something and you never get to show anything you do, it gets hard. And at that time, we really didn't have any focus or goal what we should do next. So we started doing small prototypes, doing small outsourcing projects, and other kind of things, this and that. And a couple of those projects we did was actually a small Windows Phone games, because it was the time when the smartphone started to become more general. And another project was a game engine called Blade 3D, which was actually the world's first XNA game engine. And we made some programming for that engine, but also those small Windows Phone games. And we noticed that this is something we can do. We can do these smaller projects. And when you are running a company, only finished projects matter. You learn a lot by doing games. But if you don't finish them, you can't really run a business. And of course, PC and consoles was out of the question because at that time there were no distribution channel for indie developers that you can use to distribute and sell your own games. There were no Steam like today or small console programs that you can use as an indie developer to publish your own games for consoles. So we decided to go Windows Phone because we knew how to do those, and we thought that it would be too late to make an iOS game, except the wisdom now tells that it was not too late, but at the time we thought that it is too late to start developing for iOS. But we started making, first we made a couple of small apps, just a couple of small apps that we distributed through Windows Store or Windows Phone Store at the time. But in 2011, we published our first game, our self-developed, self-published game for Windows Phone. And that game was Panzer Jumper, or we call that. It's just a small platformer. It's those couple of pictures on the top right corner of the screen. And as you can see, it's a small platformer where you can use your own tank to jump from platforms and shoot down some of the enemy angry bombs and so on. And there were lots of cool stuff, like you could unlock new tanks and unlock new levels and so on. But when we published or released that game, we got like 40,000 downloads in a very short time, and that was a huge number for us. So that was basically the reason why we decided to go full on Windows Phone. And we decided that they must be free-to-play games, and based on advertisement monetization. Because microtransactions, in-app purchases that are common today on mobile, they were not possible for the first couple of Windows Phone versions, and so we basically didn't have possibility even to try those. But after the first game we got out, we started doing more games in rapid succession, and there were quite a few games we made. And all of those got quite a lot of downloads, like tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of downloads in relatively short time. But our real breakthrough game is called Premium Pool, which we started to develop at Christmas 2011. And we made it pretty far in just 2 weeks. But we decided that we won't release it immediately. We decided that we will polish this game a lot more before releasing it and try to make it as good as possible. And after 4 months of polishing and development, we finally released it in spring 2012. So during that time, it was improved a lot. And when we released that game finally, the first downloads we received was like a few hundreds of thousands of downloads in a very short time. And at the time, that was more than our previous games combined, so it was really huge for us. And this was something that kind of woke us up to understand that you need to maintain or uphold your games that you have released. You just don't abandon them after you've released them. So we kept improving the game, and like 2 years in a row or something like that, and those hundreds of thousands of downloads turned into millions. And finally, it became one of the most downloaded games on Windows Phone, and it is still today, with 15 million players. And one of the reasons was that we were first this kind of pool game on that platform, because there were not a lot of competition then. But the more important reason is that we didn't abandon the game, but kept updating it and kept improving it based on the feedback. And that is also the reason why we are still doing pool games today. First, we made a small Windows 8 version of the game, and a couple of years back, we made a new pool game, which we tried to use to duplicate the success of the first pool game we made, but with online component. So you could use, or you could play with any platform against all platforms, or against players on all platforms, so full cross-platform multiplayer. But that was a very hard project for us, and it failed hard. It was a very expensive project for us, and we didn't basically make any money out of it. And there were lots of reasons. There were technical problems. We used new networking engine or networking technology that didn't work on launch. And also the project, the idea was diverted a lot from the original vision, and it became much more complex. So it didn't, the goal was not clear for anyone who was developing the game. But we learned from those mistakes, and this spring we released a new version on Steam, Premium Pool Arena, which have gained some success, but especially we are currently developing a console version for all possible current generation consoles from the game. But let's go a bit back to the final big mobile game we did. It's called Pirates Don't Run. This was a story-driven endless runner because we wanted to make a bigger game for mobile, and it was supposed to be a 3D game because all our previous games were 2D games. So we decided to take new technology and kind of improve upon that. And we decided that we just don't want to do another temple run with pirate team, but we want something more, and that more was a story-driven content. That was 21-page comic we wrote for the game, and also collectible cards that you could unlock while playing the game. So that was, on Windows Phone again, we managed to make another success, which gained like 3 million players. But we also noted that Windows Phone was losing its popularity. So we knew that we had to transform into iOS and Android. But we haven't developed for those, and we really didn't know how to get noted on those new platforms. Also, the monetization was quite different on iOS and Android because there were more microtransactions and in-app purchases, but we have been always doing advertisements. So we tried to kind of use this new thing like IAP and new platforms to make this game a success there, but we basically failed on that. So we knew that our mobile age would be coming to an end in some sort of the other. So we had to make new decisions. But still, at this point, I want to emphasize that 3 things about iterative development that got us this far. So every project we did was bigger or different from the previous ones, and they all supported each other. And every project taught us new things that we could do and kind of use in our next project. So I want to think that, or I want everyone who wants to make their own games to ask themselves 3 questions. That what can be used from the previous projects or previous experiences they have, and what new they would want to do with their next project. But not only that, but have a long-term plan, because it's not a short-sighted business, or doing games in short-sightedness is not a good thing, because to make yourself better and make better games in long run and your dream projects, you need to be iterative and improve upon the previous. These are very simple things that you easily forget while doing your own projects. So this is why I want to emphasize these things. And as an example, here are our own games, how we have kind of used this iterative development. So first we made the game that we finished and published ourselves. We repeated that and improved that, so we eventually got Premium Pool, which was again used to make the next game, which was again a new technology, 3D game on mobile, and put that on the new platforms, which again allowed us to make even bigger games for PC with multiplayer component. And finally, we just released our first console game, but also we have taken these new VR technologies into our company and iterated them in our projects. But before we learned to do things this way and kind of learned from our mistakes, there were lots of games that never got to see the light of day. And I tried to find one picture from every game we have made that got into playable form, some sort of the other, that never got published. And I couldn't do that because there were too many, and I didn't find all picture from all of our games that never got released. And as you can see, there are quite a few of them. But we had to move from mobile to new platforms. And because Windows Phone was dying, Android, iOS were so saturated for a small developer like us that we couldn't manage on those platforms. So we decided that now would be a good time to go to PC and consoles, because those platforms had evolved during these years so that also a small developer like us could do games and self-publish them on the big platforms. But we had lots of problems also at this point, because we had only mobile portfolio, because nobody would listen us because we only had mobile games, and nobody wouldn't listen someone about their PC or console ideas when you had only mobile games done. And we also had to kind of find a new way of doing things, because we developed everything ourselves, we published and marketed everything ourselves, and those things are very different on mobile than they are on consoles or PC. Also, the style changed from free-to-play to premium, which is, again, a completely different thing. And this led to a situation where we had 3 projects at the one time, in development in one time. We had 7 people doing 3 projects, so we lost our focus of doing things. And just don't do that. Make one project at a time. And now I want to show a small, brief post-mortem about 2 of our latest games. The first is Race Online or Race Arcade, that was yesterday published on Xbox One. But it started as a very different project. It was to be a game, a retro-styled racing game for mobile phones, with good playability, smooth controls, and ability to play it online or locally. And there should be at least 100 tracks, track editor, car customization, and even character customization. And I highlighted those parts that eventually, after 3 years of development, got into the final game, which is 2 years more than we thought about doing that game. And there's the first one picture that shows what was the first version or prototype of our game. So as you can see, it started as a kind of a slick and slide, or homage to the slick and slide game. But when we made a transition, we started as a mobile project. But when we showed the mobile version of the game for publishers or mobile publishers, no one was interested about it. There was something wrong as a mobile game, and we didn't get any feedback from anywhere, so we decided that we can't do this on mobile, we can't do this alone. And at this point, we decided to go to PC. And also, it changed that it should be premium, not free to play. So we had to start all over again. And soon after that, we also had the possibility to start console development, which yet again changed things. So it was too long project with too many changes. And when we finally got it out in early access program, we didn't have enough time because of the 3 projects to put an effort and update the game constantly. And after over a year being in early access, the game was released this spring on Steam, but Steam had changed during that time, because the algorithms Steam uses to promote games, they have changed in a way that our game was early access game, an old game with no popularity. So when we released it, we were basically invisible with this game to all Steam audience, and we are still today. So that was a big mistake from our part. And also one mistake was that there were too many features to implement that only worked on PC. For example, online component and editor that could be only used on PC, that made the project longer, and it also made the marketing a lot harder. And the name was too generic. No one finds this on Google by Googling Race Online. And here are a few pictures from the final game. But we finally got it out on console, and we learned from those mistakes, and based on the feedback we received so far, it has been far more successful than the PC version. Then the final game I'm going to talk about in detail is Iceflake, which I think is our best game or our best project considering the development and all kinds of development and technical aspects. Today it has over 100,000 sales on Steam, very positive reviews. It was nominated in the best big screen game category in Finnish Game Awards this year. It was also presented in Rio Olympics last year, and it's very popular on YouTube and Twitch. We also made a VR version out of it. But why it has been successful and why it was a good project? Well, we had a clear vision from the start. We made a simple question. We gave a simple question. What would be what if Battlefield would be an ice fishing game? What would it be? Basically, what I mean by this is that what kind of fishing game would be fun for everyone, but serious enough for those that are playing simulators or more serious games. So we made a small prototype in 2 weeks to be kind of a proof of concept for us that it would be fun to develop, it would be easy, even feasible for us to develop, and if it would be fun to play. And after that 2 weeks, we had a prototype running, and we thought that, okay, everything looks good. And we started the production. And 13 months later, with 2.5 developers, the game was released in April 2016. And the original vision we had kept during that project. We didn't have any feature creep, so we would add this and that and everything during the process. We just kept our original goals. And we decided that we could add more content after the launch. And that we have done, updated the game constantly over a year now, and we still do that. So again, that's part of the problem, part of the solution why this is so successful and our best project so far. And a couple of those features are mobile versions of it. It has been released on iOS, on Android, and we also added the VR version, which have managed to gain a completely new kind of audiences, like, for example, VR arcades and people that would have never tested the game before. And so this is part of the thing that you need to keep your eyes open and implement new technologies while you see them, if they seem feasible. And about VR, I think they are awesome devices, and they give more value to the game. I think that you can't do a VR game and be commercially successful with just only VR game. But we think that if you add a VR feature to an existing game, it can be highly beneficial for you. If it doesn't drop the value of the game, it increases it. But it is hard message to deliver for anyone, because if you have both versions, VR and standard version of the game, it's very hard to communicate for people that it's both. Everyone thinks that it's either VR or not VR. So we got even today questions that is there possibility to play it without VR, because I would buy it if you can play without VR. So that's one thing that is very hard to answer. But those 3 points I mentioned in the beginning, that I hope you keep and take with you when you leave this presentation, are that we have learned to be very hard to remember while doing your own projects. These are very simple things, but they are very hard to remember while you are very concentrated doing what you do. Is that firstly, you need to be persistent, because doing games is easy, but finishing them is very hard. The last 10% of the game development or any project is 90% of the work. And you need to have some kind of plan. You need to be iterative in your development and have a long-term plan. And don't make your dream project at once, because it will come if you have a good plan. And you need to be able to adapt new technologies constantly, because it's part of the business. New platforms, new technologies, new engines, and that sort of stuff. Don't get frustrated by that. And you need to keep your focus, because it's very fun to start new things before finishing the previous ones. You need to keep focus on what you are doing and make that finished product, because that's the only way you can get forward and have a good portfolio in the end. But of course, sometimes it's hard to do, because the reasons can be money issues or that sort of stuff. But you should try to keep your focus. And these are the 3 points I hope that our experiences that I showed you. I didn't talk about all of our games or all the things we have done, but I hope that this presentation gave some sort of idea that how we have managed to implement these 3 key points to our own company. And of course, everyone is always asking what you are doing now. I can just say at the moment that we are currently doing a new type of management game that will be completely different than the games in the genre previously. And I hope that we can tell more about this project later this year. And that's all. Thank you. And if there's any questions now, you can ask them.
Thank you for the presentation. I have a question related to running a game company, because we have a game company about the same size as you,
yeah.
And we are just at the verge of our first game, trying to publish it and get it going, and of course doing it no money and all that. What is the steps that you guys had to take in terms of having that no money at all situations, and just wanting to do your own projects but keep doing that and try to believe in getting that game published and at some point hopefully make money out of it and make a business out of it. So what kind of advice or tips do you have for companies at that stage? So how do you go after investors, or do you go after just try to publish and earn money from there?
Yeah, well, that of course depends if you have a mobile or PC title, how you should do. But basically what we have done is that we have slowly gained more projects that would make more revenue. Those are the little streams that come here and there that increase the total sum of money you earn. And in the beginning, we made 5 years or even more work without salary. We had our other jobs we did, or some outsourcing projects we did. That gained us more revenue. So basically, we did everything on our free time. But while doing your first project, and congratulations for that, that's a big step. And so I would try and test the game as widely as possible, get some feedback if it's good game, and how players react. Someone who haven't ever heard about that game, how would they react? And if that's something that they want to play and you see that they want to play, then there might be something good. If not, you could try and ask what kind of thing would change the game so it would be more fun. And try to make the marketing. Don't keep your game hidden and kind of have that as the greatest secret in the world. Just go out and show that game and tell about it and try to get the message running so that everyone will know about your game when you publish that. Is there other questions?
If there's no more questions, thank you very much.
Thank you.